The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail as Penelope Keller urged her exhausted horse forward, the world around her blurring as fever gripped her body with increasing intensity. She had been traveling for days, her supplies dwindling and her strength waning with each passing hour. The distant promise of Mojave, California, once so hopeful, now seemed like a cruel mirage dancing beyond her reach. The year was 1878, and Penelope had left everything behind in Boston after receiving word that her uncle had passed, leaving her his modest property in California. With no family remaining in the East and the shadow of a broken engagement haunting her, the 23-year-old had packed her belongings and set out west, determined to start anew. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Her horse stumbled, and Penelope swayed dangerously in the saddle. The infection that had begun as a small cut on her hand 3 days ago had spread rapidly, turning her skin an angry red and sending waves of heat through her body. She had tried to tend to it with the limited medical supplies she carried, but out here, alone in the unforgiving wilderness, such measures were woefully inadequate. "Just a little further," she whispered to her horse, though she had no idea how much further they needed to go. The map had blown away during a sudden dust storm the previous day, leaving her disoriented and lost. The landscape around her was alien vast expanses of sand and rock, dotted with sparse vegetation and the occasional cactus standing tall against the harsh terrain. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Penelope's vision swam. Her grip on the reins loosened, and she felt herself slipping sideways. She tried to right herself, but her limbs refused to cooperate. The last thing she remembered was the ground rushing up to meet her as she tumbled from her saddle, the world fading to black around her. Miles away, Remington Nash guided his horse along a familiar trail, returning from a cattle drive that had taken him far from his small ranch outside Mojave. The 30-year-old cowboy had been riding since dawn, eager to return home after weeks on the trail. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, painting the desert in hues of gold and amber. As he rounded a bend, Remington spotted something unusual in the distance, a horse, still saddled but riderless, grazing on a patch of dry grass. Frowning, he approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the surroundings. That was when he saw her, a woman, lying motionless on the ground, her dress coated with dust. Dismounting quickly, Remington hurried to her side. She was burning with fever, her face flushed and her breathing shallow. Gently he turned her over, noting with concern the infected wound on her hand. "Miss? Can you hear me?" he called, tapping her cheek lightly. She remained unresponsive, lost in the depths of her fever. With practiced efficiency, Remington assessed the situation. They were at least half a day's ride from town, and the woman needed immediate care. His ranch was closer, perhaps 2 hours, if he pushed their horses. "Hang on, miss," he murmured, carefully lifting her onto his horse. He secured her belongings to her own mount, and with one arm holding her steady, set off toward his ranch as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The journey seemed interminable as Remington rode through the gathering darkness, the woman's burning form pressed against his chest. He could feel the heat of her fever even through his shirt, and her occasional whimpers of pain tore at something deep within him. Though he had lived alone since returning from the war, the solitude of his existence had never felt as stark as it did now, with this stranger's life quite literally in his hands. By the time the outline of his modest ranch house came into view, night had fully descended. The woman had grown quieter, which worried him more than her earlier sounds of distress. Remington dismounted carefully, cradling her in his arms as he carried her inside. His home was simple but clean, a main room with a hearth, a small kitchen area, a bedroom, and a storage space that doubled as a workspace when the weather turned harsh. He laid the woman on his bed, quickly lighting a lamp to better assess her condition. In the warm glow of the lamplight, he could see her more clearly. Despite the pallor of illness, she was beautiful chestnut hair falling in waves around a face with delicate features. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, and dressed in traveling clothes that, while dusty from the trail, spoke of quality and care. Remington set to work with grim determination. He stoked the fire in the hearth, heated water, and gathered the limited medical supplies he kept on hand, remnants of his time, serving as an impromptu field medic during the war. The infection in her hand was severe, the skin around the wound angry and swollen. Carefully, he cleaned the area, wincing in sympathy when she moaned in pain despite her unconscious state. The wound needed to be drained and treated with the strongest remedies he had available. As he worked, he spoke to her in a low, steady voice. "You're safe now, miss. I know it hurts, but this'll help draw out the infection." He applied a poultice of herbs he'd learned about from an old Cherokee man who'd once saved his life. "I don't know who you are or where you're headed, but you picked a mighty inconvenient place to fall ill." Once he'd done all he could for her wound, Remington turned his attention to her fever. He bathed her face with cool water, changed her into one of his clean shirts, averting his eyes as much as possible to preserve her modesty, and coaxed small sips of water between her parched lips. As dawn approached, Remington sat in a chair beside the bed, exhaustion pulling at him. The woman's fever still raged, but her breathing seemed a bit less labored. He had done all he could for now. Reluctantly, he left her side to tend to the horses and prepare for what he suspected would be a long battle ahead. The first day passed in a blur of activity. Remington divided his time between caring for his unexpected patient and maintaining the essential tasks of the ranch. He changed her poultice regularly, bathed her with cool water when her fever spiked, and tried to get her to drink whenever she showed signs of awareness, which were rare and fleeting. As evening fell, he sat beside her, spooning thin broth into her mouth. "You're a fighter," he observed as she swallowed reflexively. "That's good. You'll need to be." He had searched her belongings earlier, looking for identification or information about relatives who should be notified. He'd found a letter addressed to Penelope Keller regarding property inherited from an uncle in Mojave. Given the circumstances, he assumed she was the Penelope in question. "Miss Keller," he said, testing the name. "Penelope, I'm Remington Nash, Rem to most folks. I reckon you can't hear me, but it seems only proper to introduce myself, considering the circumstances." Night fell, and Remington made himself a pallet on the floor beside the bed, unwilling to leave her alone. Her fever had risen again, and she tossed restlessly, occasionally crying out words he couldn't understand. Each time he rose to soothe her, wiping her brow and speaking calm reassurances until she settled. In the small hours of the morning, she suddenly grasped his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes opened, feverishly bright in the dim light of the banked fire. "Who are you?" she rasped, her voice barely audible. "Remington Nash, madam. Found you collapsed out in the desert. You're at my ranch now." Her grip tightened momentarily. "Am I dying?" The question, asked with such direct simplicity, caught him off guard. "Not if I have anything to say about it," he answered firmly. "Now rest. You need your strength." Her eyes drifted closed again, but she didn't release his wrist until sleep reclaimed her. The second day brought no improvement. If anything, Penelope's condition worsened. Her fever climbed higher, and the infection, despite Remington's careful treatment, showed no signs of retreating. He considered writing for the doctor in town, but was reluctant to leave her alone for the hours such a journey would require. Instead, he redoubled his efforts, applying fresh poultices and desperately trying to bring her fever down with cool compresses. When these measures proved insufficient, he carried her outside to the water trough, murmuring apologies as he lowered her partially into the cool water, supporting her head above the surface. "Forgive the impropriety, Miss Keller," he said as she gasped at the shock of the cold, "but conventional methods aren't cutting it." The immersion seemed to help temporarily, and when he carried her back inside, her skin felt less scorching to the touch. He dried her gently and changed her into another of his shirts before tucking her into bed with fresh linens. As he worked around the ranch that afternoon, Remington found his thoughts continually returning to his patient. Who was Penelope Keller? What had driven a clearly well-bred Eastern woman to travel alone to the harsh California desert? The letter suggested she was coming to claim property, but there was more to her story, he was sure of it. That evening, as he changed her bandages, he noticed with alarm that dark streaks were beginning to extend from the wound up her arm, blood poisoning. His heart sank. He had seen such signs during the war, and they rarely preceded anything but tragedy. "No," he said aloud, his voice firm in the quiet room. "I won't let that happen." With renewed determination, he prepared a stronger poultice, adding wild garlic and honey to the mixture. He had once seen an army surgeon save a man's arm with a similar concoction when all conventional treatments had failed. It was a desperate measure, but desperation was all he had left. As he applied the pungent mixture, Penelope stirred, moaning in pain. Her eyes fluttered open, more lucid than they had been since he'd found her. "It hurts," she whispered. "I know," he answered gently, "but this might save your arm, save your life." She looked at him, really seeing him for the first time. "You've been caring for me." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "Going on 2 days now." A faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Nash." "Remington," he corrected. "Or Rem." "Remington," she repeated, the name soft on her fever-dry lips. Then her eyes closed again, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. The night that followed was the worst yet. Penelope's fever raged so high that Remington feared for her mind as well as her life. She alternated between restless thrashing and periods of such stillness that he repeatedly checked to ensure she was still breathing. He spoke to her continuously through the dark hours, telling her about his ranch, about the beauty of the desert in spring, about anything that came to mind, as if his voice could serve as an anchor to keep her from drifting away completely. Dawn of the third day brought an unexpected sound rain, rare and precious in this arid land. Remington opened the windows to let the cool, fresh air circulate through the stifling room. The temperature drop seemed to ease Penelope's discomfort slightly, and for the first time, Remington allowed himself a flicker of hope. He took advantage of her calmer state to tend to necessary chores, checking on her frequently. When he returned from feeding the livestock, he found her awake, her gaze following him as he entered the room. "Water," she requested, her voice a thread of sound. He helped her drink, supporting her head with one hand while holding the cup to her lips with the other. When she had taken her fill, he eased her back against the pillows. "How long?" she asked. "This is the 3rd day since I found you." She closed her eyes, processing this information. "My horse?" "Safe in the stable, as are your belongings." "You're very kind." Remington shook his head, "just doing what anyone would do." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "We both know that's not true." Her eyes opened again, meeting his. "Thank you, Remington." The way she said his name, with such genuine gratitude, stirred something within him that he thought had long since withered away. Before he could respond, however, she had drifted back to sleep, her breathing more even than it had been in days. That afternoon, Remington checked her wound and found the angry red streak slightly diminished. The poultice seemed to be working, drawing out the poison that threatened her life. Encouraged, he prepared a fresh application, wrapping her hand and arm carefully. While she slept, he took the opportunity to wash her face and comb the tangles from her hair, his calloused hands unaccustomed to such delicate work. She looked younger with her features relaxed in sleep, vulnerable in a way that awoke protective instincts he hadn't realized he still possessed. As evening approached, Penelope woke again, more alert than before. She managed to swallow a few spoonfuls of broth before exhaustion claimed her once more. Each small victory, a moment of lucidity, a few sips of broth, a slight reduction in her fever felt monumental to Remington. The rain continued through the night, drumming softly on the roof as Remington maintained his vigil. He dozed intermittently in the chair beside her bed, jerking awake at her slightest sound. In the darkest hour before dawn, she called out in her sleep, clear words this time rather than incoherent murmurings. Please don't leave me, she pleaded, though her eyes remained closed. Everyone leaves. Without thinking, Remington reached for her uninjured hand, holding it gently in his own. I'm right here, he assured her. I'm not going anywhere. She quieted at the sound of his voice, her fingers curling weakly around his. They remained that way until morning light filtered through the windows, illuminating their joined hands like a promise neither had consciously made. The fourth day marked a turning point. Penelope's fever, while still present, had decreased notably. The wound on her hand looked less angry, and the dark streaks had receded. She was awake for longer periods, able to drink more and even eat small amounts of the simple foods Remington prepared. You should be a doctor, she commented as he changed her bandage with gentle efficiency. Remington shook his head. Just picked up a few things during the war. Necessity more than talent. Which side? She asked, then immediately looked chagrined. Forgive me. That's too personal. Union, he answered simply. Though out here, such distinctions matter less than they do back east. The land doesn't care which side you fought for, it'll kill you just the same if you don't respect it. Penelope was quiet for a moment. I was meant to marry a Confederate officer, she finally said, an arrangement between our families. But after the war, she trailed off, her gaze distant. After the war, many things changed, Remington finished for her, understanding in his voice. He didn't press for more, recognizing the shadows in her eyes as similar to those he sometimes saw in his own reflection. Later that day, feeling stronger, Penelope asked if she might sit up properly. Remington helped her, arranging pillows behind her back and bringing a cup of willow bark tea to help with the pain. Tell me about your ranch, she requested, looking around the modest room with interest. Remington found himself talking more than he had in months, describing the small herd of cattle he maintained, the vegetable garden that supplemented his diet, and his plans to expand once he'd saved enough. Penelope listened attentively, asking questions that revealed a quick intelligence beneath her still fragile exterior. And you manage all this alone? She asked. Hire help during roundup and branding, he explained. Rest of the time, it's just me. Don't you get lonely? The question, asked with simple curiosity rather than pity, caught him off guard. He'd grown so accustomed to solitude that he rarely thought of it in terms of loneliness. Suppose I do at times, he admitted, but it's peaceful too, after the war. Peace counts for a lot. Penelope nodded, understanding in her eyes. Yes, she agreed softly. It does. That evening, she insisted on trying to feed herself, though her hands trembled with weakness. Remington watched, ready to assist but respecting her determination. When she dropped the spoon, frustration flashed across her face. It's all right to need help, he said gently, retrieving the utensil. Doesn't make you weak. I've been nothing but helpless since you found me, she replied, her voice tight with emotion. I hate feeling so useless. You've been fighting for your life, Remington corrected. That's hardly useless. A small smile touched her lips. You have a gift for seeing things differently, Mr. Nash. Rem, he reminded her, and it's not different, just true. He helped her finish her meal, and as night fell, he noticed her eyelids growing heavy despite her efforts to stay awake. Rest, he encouraged. Tomorrow you'll be stronger. As he turned to leave, she caught his hand. Where will you sleep? Floor's not so bad, he assured her, gesturing to the pallet he'd been using. Penelope frowned. This is your bed. I've imposed enough. You didn't impose, you were unconscious, he pointed out with a hint of humor. And I'm not about to put a sick woman on the floor, so let's not have that argument, she sighed, relenting. At least take a proper pillow, she insisted, offering one of the two she was using. Remington accepted it with a nod, touched by her concern despite her own condition. Good night, Penelope. Good night, Remington. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it lingered in the quiet room like an unspoken acknowledgment of the unusual intimacy that circumstances had thrust upon them. The fifth day dawned clear and bright, the desert air washed clean by the recent rain. Penelope woke feeling markedly improved, her mind clear and her body, while still weak, no longer consumed by fever. Remington had already been up for hours, tending to his chores. He returned to find her sitting up, attempting to comb her tangled hair with her uninjured hand. "Here," he said, taking the comb. "Let me help." She hesitated only briefly before turning her back to him, allowing him to work through the knots with unexpected gentleness. His large, work-roughened hands moved with careful precision, never pulling or causing discomfort. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked, surprised by his skill. "Had a sister once," he replied, his voice matter-of-fact despite the past tense that hinted at loss. "She taught me when she broke her wrist falling from a tree. Said if I was going to be any use to her, I'd better learn to do it right." Penelope smiled at the image. "You were close." "We were." He finished with her hair, setting the comb aside. "She'd have liked you." The simple statement, offered without elaboration, felt more meaningful than a flowery compliment might have. Later, Remington helped Penelope to a chair by the window, where she could look out at the landscape that had nearly claimed her life. The desert stretched vast and beautiful before her, dotted with vegetation that had sprung to vibrant life following the rain. "It's not what I expected," she admitted, gazing at the vista. "There's so much life." "Desert fools people that way," Remington agreed, joining her at the window. "Looks barren and hostile, but it's teeming with life that's just adapted to harsh conditions." "Like its people," Penelope observed, glancing at him. He nodded, a small smile touching his normally serious face. "Reckon so." They sat in companionable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily in the clear blue sky. The simple pleasure of being alive and aware enough to appreciate such a moment wasn't lost on Penelope, who had come so close to losing everything. "I never asked," she said suddenly. "What town are we near?" "Mojave's about half a day's ride southeast," Remington answered. "That where you were headed?" Penelope nodded. "My uncle left me his property there. It's not much. From what I understand, a small house and some land, but it's a fresh start." "Joseph Keller was your uncle?" Remington asked, surprise evident in his voice. "You knew him?" "Not well, but everyone knew old Joe. Good man. Kept to himself mostly, but always willing to lend a hand when needed." He paused, considering. "His place is about an hour from here, just outside town." The knowledge that her destination was so close that she might already be there, if not for her illness, brought a complicated mix of emotions to Penelope's face. "Perhaps it was fate," she said finally. "If I had made it there, I would have been alone when the fever took hold. I might have died." "Fate's a funny thing," Remington agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "Never much believed in it before." The implication hung in the air between them, neither willing to acknowledge it directly, but both feeling its presence nonetheless. That evening, Penelope insisted on helping prepare their meal, despite Remington's protests. She could stand now, albeit shakily, and having a purpose eased the restlessness that came with recovery. "I won't overdo it," she promised, "but I need to do something besides lie in bed." Remington relented, setting her to simple tasks she could manage while seated at the table. They worked together in easy harmony, and the resulting meal, while simple, felt like a celebration of sorts, a marker of how far she had come from the brink of death. "Tell me about Boston," Remington requested as they ate. "Never been further east than Kansas myself." Penelope described the city, its bustling streets, imposing buildings, and rigid social structures. As she spoke, Remington noticed how she mentioned the place but not the people, as if deliberately avoiding personal connections. "Sounds crowded," he commented when she finished. She laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. "It is, wonderfully, terribly crowded. There's never silence, never solitude." "And you left all that for a patch of desert?" Her expression sobered. "After my parents died, influenza, 2 years ago, there was little to keep me there. And when Edward," she hesitated, then continued. "When my engagement ended, the prospect of staying became unbearable." "His loss," Remington said simply. Penelope looked up, surprised by the quiet conviction in his voice. You don't even know me. Know enough, he countered. Know you fought to live when many would have given up. Know you're kind, even when suffering. Know you see beauty where others might see only harshness. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Seems like enough to be getting on with. A flush that had nothing to do with fever colored Penelope's cheeks. Thank you, she said softly. Later, as night fell and the temperature dropped, Remington built up the fire. Penelope, wrapped in a blanket in the chair nearby, watched him with thoughtful eyes. Would you tell me something? She asked. Something about yourself, I mean. I feel as though you know all about me, but you remain a mystery. Remington considered the request, unused to speaking about himself. What would you like to know? Anything. How you came to be here. What you dream of. Whatever you wish to share. He was quiet for so long that Penelope began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, as if the words were being pulled from someplace deep within. After the war, I couldn't go back home to Illinois. Too many ghosts. Worked my way west, taking whatever jobs came along, cattle drives mostly, some mining, even railroad work for a spell. He paused, poking at the fire. Saved every penny until I had enough for this place. It's not much, but it's mine. And no one else's, Penelope added perceptively. He nodded. Solitude has its merits. No expectations to meet, no disappointments to cause. No one to disappoint you either, she observed. Their eyes met across the room, understanding passing between them. They were both, in their own ways, hiding from pain, she by fleeing across the country, he by retreating into isolation. As for dreams, Remington continued after a moment, they're simple enough. Make the ranch prosper, maybe add to the house someday. He glanced around the modest space. Always thought a proper porch would be nice, somewhere to watch the sunset. Penelope smiled, imagining it. I think that sounds lovely. Something shifted between them in that quiet moment, a recognition perhaps of kindred spirits found in the most unlikely of circumstances. The 6th day brought another improvement in Penelope's condition. The wound was healing cleanly, and though weakness still plagued her, she could move about the cabin with increasing confidence. Remington hovered nearby, ready to assist if needed, but giving her the independence she clearly craved. I'll need to go into town for supplies tomorrow, he mentioned as they shared lunch. Been putting it off, but we're running low on essentials. Penelope nodded, understanding the dilemma. I'll be fine for a few hours, she assured him. I'm hardly at death's door anymore. Remington looked unconvinced. Still don't like leaving you alone so soon. I promise not to swoon dramatically in your absence, she teased, drawing a reluctant smile from him. Just stay inside and rest, he insisted. I'll be back as quick as I can. They spent the afternoon on the small bench Remington had placed outside the door, soaking in the winter sunshine. Despite the season, the desert day was pleasantly warm, though Remington warned that once the sun set, temperatures would plummet. It's so vast, Penelope marveled, gazing at the landscape stretching before them. Makes a person feel insignificant. Or free, Remington countered, depending on how you look at it. She considered this, tilting her face to catch the sun's rays. I think perhaps both are true simultaneously, insignificant in the grand scheme, yet perfectly free within that insignificance. Remington glanced at her, struck by the observation. You have an unusual way of seeing things, Penelope Keller. Says the cowboy who rescued a stranger and nursed her through fever without a second thought, she returned, her eyes twinkling. I believe that makes two unusual people in this conversation, he chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. Fair point. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert, Penelope shivered slightly. Remington immediately stood, offering his hand. Inside before you catch a chill, he said, his tone brooking no argument. Last thing you need is a setback. She allowed him to help her up, but didn't immediately release his hand once standing. Thank you, she said, her voice soft with sincerity. Not just for this, for everything. I owe you my life, Remington." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "No debt between us," he said firmly. "None at all." That evening, as Penelope rested in bed and Remington prepared for his journey to town the following day, a comfortable silence enveloped the cabin. It struck Penelope how quickly she had become accustomed to his presence, the sound of his movements, the cadence of his breathing, the sense of safety he brought to the small space they shared. The thought of returning to her uncle's empty house, of building a life alone in this new place, suddenly seemed less appealing than it had in Boston. She pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to the vulnerability of recovery, but it lingered nonetheless, a whisper of possibility she wasn't yet ready to acknowledge. Dawn of the seventh day arrived with a spectacular play of colors across the desert sky. Remington was up before first light, preparing for his trip to town. Penelope insisted on rising to see him off, despite his protests. "I've made a list of things you might need," he said, handing her a piece of paper. "Doctor's in town Wednesday, so I'll bring him back if he's there." "I'm much better," she assured him. "But thank you." He hesitated at the door, clearly reluctant to leave. "There's food ready. Water's within reach. If anything happens—" "Remington," she interrupted gently. "I'll be fine." With a nod, he finally departed, glancing back once before urging his horse forward. Penelope watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned to face the day alone for the first time since her collapse in the desert. The hours stretched endlessly as she moved carefully around the cabin. Despite her assurances to Remington, she tired quickly and had to rest frequently. Still, there was satisfaction in managing on her own, in proving to herself that she was indeed recovering. She spent time examining the cabin more thoroughly than she had been able to before, noting the small touches that spoke of Remington's character books well worn from repeated reading, a guitar in the corner collecting dust but carefully maintained, a small wooden carving of a hawk that showed surprising artistry. In the chest at the foot of the bed, she found a tintype photograph of a young woman with Remington's serious eyes and a more familiar smile. His sister, she presumed, feeling a pang of sadness for the loss he had mentioned so matter-of-factly. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion overtook her, and Penelope retired to the bed for a nap. She dreamed of Boston, of crowded streets and stifling parlors, but in the dream she was searching for something or someone she couldn't find, the sense of loss growing more acute with each passing moment. She woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching, the dream fading as she oriented herself. Through the window, she could see Remington returning, accompanied by an older man on a separate horse. The doctor, she presumed, straightening her clothing and attempting to smooth her hair. Remington entered first, his eyes immediately seeking her out, relief evident in his expression when he found her up and about. "Dr. Matthews," he introduced the older man who followed him. "This is Miss Penelope Keller." The doctor was a gruff but kind man who examined Penelope's wound with professional efficiency, asking questions about her symptoms and recovery thus far. When he finished, he nodded approvingly. "You've done well, Nash," he told Remington. "Infection's nearly cleared, and the wound's healing nicely. Another week of rest, and she should be fully recovered." After providing some additional medicine and instructions, Dr. Matthews departed, declining Remington's offer of dinner with a knowing glance between the two that made Penelope blush despite herself. Once alone, Remington began unpacking the supplies he'd purchased, including several items specifically for Penelope: a comb, a small mirror, soap that smelled of lavender rather than the harsh lye he used, and a simple but practical dress that would fit her better than his borrowed shirts. "How did you know my size?" she asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Asked Mrs. Turner at the general store," he explained. "Described you as best I could. Hope it fits well enough to get you to town when you're ready." The mention of leaving cast a sudden shadow over the moment. Penelope ran her fingers over the fabric of the dress, her emotions conflicted. "I also stopped by your uncle's place," Remington continued, not noticing her distraction. "It's in decent shape. Needs some cleaning, but the roof's sound and the well's good. It'll make a fine home once you're settled." Yes, Penelope agreed, her voice not quite steady. I'm sure it will. That night, as they shared a meal of fresh bread, cheese, and dried fruit Remington had brought from town, conversation flowed more easily than ever before. He told her about the people he'd encountered, the news from town, the preparations being made for the upcoming harvest festival, despite it being weeks away. You should still be here for it, he said. It's quite the event for such a small place. Music, dancing, more food than you can imagine. It sounds wonderful, Penelope replied, trying to picture herself as part of this community, this life so different from the one she'd known. As they cleared away the dishes, working together in the small space, their hands brushed occasionally, each contact sending a current of awareness through Penelope. She found herself watching Remington when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the careful precision of his movements, the way the lamplight caught in his dark hair. When had this happened? When had this man, a stranger just 7 days ago, become someone whose presence affected her so profoundly? Later, as they sat before the fire, Remington brought out the guitar she had noticed earlier. Thought you might like some music, he explained, seeming almost shy. Been a while since I played for anyone, so I'm a bit rusty. He began to play, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The melody was simple but beautiful, filling the small cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Penelope watched his hands, strong and capable, whether tending wounds, working the land, or creating this unexpected beauty. When the song ended, she found herself near tears, though she couldn't have explained why. That was lovely, she said softly. Remington looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire-lit space. My mother taught me, said music feeds the soul when nothing else can. She was wise. She was. He set the guitar aside. Your turn. Penelope blinked in surprise. My turn. To share something. A story, a song, something of yourself. She considered for a moment, then began to recite a poem she had memorized years ago, about a traveler choosing between two paths in a wood. Her voice gained strength as she continued, the familiar words taking on new meaning in this context, in this place so far from where she had first heard them. When she finished, Remington was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You never said why your engagement ended, he observed quietly. The abrupt change of subject startled her. No, I didn't. Would you tell me now? Penelope looked down at her hands, at the healing wound that had nearly cost her life and had instead brought her here, to this moment. Edward decided I wasn't suitable, she said finally. After my parents died and our financial circumstances changed, he reconsidered his options. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was for the best, really. I was more in love with the idea of security than with him, I think. Remington's expression hardened. He's a fool. Perhaps, she acknowledged, or perhaps just practical. Marriage is a contract after all, especially in certain circles. Not where I come from, Remington said firmly. Where I come from, it's a promise made with the heart, not the pocketbook. The conviction in his voice stirred something within Penelope, a longing for such certainty, such clarity of feeling. And have you made such a promise? She asked, immediately regretting the personal question. But Remington didn't seem offended. No, he answered simply. Never found anyone I wanted to promise forever to. He paused, his eyes holding hers. Until recently. The implication hung in the air between them, neither willing to be the first to acknowledge it directly. Finally, Penelope broke the tension with a small laugh. Listen to us, she said. A week ago I was half dead and you were a stranger. Now we're discussing matters of the heart as if we've known each other always. Sometimes a week is enough, Remington replied, his voice low and certain. Sometimes less. Penelope felt her heart quicken at his words, at the intensity in his gaze. Remington. It's late, he said suddenly, standing. You should rest. Doctor's orders. Grateful for the reprieve, yet somehow disappointed, Penelope nodded. Yes, of course. That night, as she lay in the bed that still smelled faintly of him despite the clean linens, Penelope found sleep elusive. Her mind replayed every moment, every conversation, every look that had passed between them over the past 7 days. 7 days. Such a short time to know someone, yet she felt as though she understood Remington Nash better than people she'd known all her life. He had seen her at her worst, delirious, helpless, hovering near death, and had treated her with unfailing kindness and respect. He had shared his home, his food, his time without hesitation or expectation of return. And somewhere along the way, between fever dreams and healing poultices, between shared meals and quiet conversations, something had changed. She had changed. The woman who had set out from Boston seeking escape now found herself longing for connection not to the past she had fled, but to this man, this place, this life so different from anything she had imagined. Morning arrived with a sense of expectation, as if the new day held particular significance. Penelope dressed in the new clothes Remington had brought, grateful to feel more like herself again. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found him already up, preparing a breakfast that was more elaborate than their usual fare. "Special occasion?" she asked, indicating the spread. Remington turned, his expression softening as he took in her appearance. "You look better," he said, avoiding her question. "More yourself." "I feel better," she confirmed, joining him at the table. Almost human again. They ate in companionable silence, but Penelope sensed an undercurrent of tension, as if Remington was holding something back. Finally, as they finished their meal, he spoke. "I've been thinking," he began, then hesitated. "Your uncle's place is ready whenever you feel strong enough to move there. But I want you to know—" He paused again, seeming to struggle for words. "You're welcome to stay here, as long as you need, or want." Penelope's heart quickened at the implication. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose further." "It's not an imposition," he said firmly. "It's an invitation." Their eyes met across the table. And in that moment, Penelope recognized the choice before her, not just between two places to live, but between two ways of life, two possible futures. "Remington," she began, uncertain how to express the tumult of emotions within her. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, more than I can possibly say, but I came west for independence, to build a life on my own terms." His face fell slightly, though he tried to hide it. "Of course, I understand." "No," she said quickly, reaching for his hand. "I don't think you do. I want that independence still, but these past days have shown me something I didn't expect to find." "What's that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That independence doesn't have to mean solitude. That strength can be found in connection as well as self-reliance." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't want to stay because I need to. I want to stay because I choose to. Because in 7 days, you've become more important to me than I thought possible." The expression that crossed Remington's face was like sunrise after the longest night, hope and joy breaking through the careful reserve he typically maintained. "I've been alone a long time," he said, his fingers tightening around hers. "Thought I preferred it that way. Then I found you in the desert, more dead than alive, and everything changed." He paused, searching for words. "These 7 days have been the most terrifying and the most wonderful of my life. Terrifying because I thought I might lose you before I really found you. Wonderful because you're you, Penelope. And somehow, against all odds, you're here." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. "So I am," she whispered. "Here. With you." Remington stood, drawing her to her feet and into his arms with gentle insistence. She came willingly, her body fitting against his as naturally as if they had embraced 1,000 times before. "I'm not asking for promises," he said, his voice low and intense. "Not yet. But I'm asking for a chance. A chance to see if what's begun between us these past days can grow into something lasting. Penelope looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "I think," she said softly, "that it already has." When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home not to a place, but to a person, to the possibility of a future neither had imagined a week ago. Outside, the desert stretched vast and beautiful under the morning sun, harsh yet teeming with hidden life, much like the man whose arms held her so carefully. Penelope Keller had come west seeking a new beginning, never dreaming it would find her instead in a fever, in a stranger's kindness, in 7 days that changed everything. 6 months later, the desert bloomed with spring wildflowers, painting the landscape in vibrant hues that defied the harsh terrain. Penelope stood on the porch. Remington had built the porch he had dreamed of, where they could watch the sunset together, marveling at the transformation. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Remington asked, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "Breathtaking," she agreed, accepting the cup gratefully. "Hard to believe it's the same place that nearly killed me." He slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "The desert gives life as readily as it takes it away. You just have to know how to look." Penelope smiled, leaning into his embrace. So much had changed since that fateful day when fever had claimed her on the trail. Her uncle's property had been sold, the proceeds invested in expanding the ranch that was now their shared home. The cabin had been enlarged, the herd increased, and the solitude that had once defined Remington's existence replaced by a partnership neither had anticipated, but both cherished deeply. They had married in April, a small ceremony attended by the handful of people they had come to call friends, Dr. Matthews, the Turners from the general store, neighbors from surrounding ranches. Penelope had worn a simple white dress, and Remington had played his guitar afterward, a new song he had composed just for her. Life was not always easy. The land demanded constant attention, and the isolation that had once been Remington's refuge sometimes weighed on Penelope, who had grown up surrounded by people and activity. But they faced each challenge together, finding in each other the strength to overcome obstacles neither could have managed alone. "I had a letter from Boston yesterday," Penelope mentioned, sipping her coffee. "Mary Williams, a childhood friend. She's married now to a banker's son, living exactly the life I thought I wanted." "Any regrets?" Remington asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Penelope turned in his arms, facing him fully. "Not one," she assured him. "How could I regret finding you, finding us?" The sincerity in her voice brought a smile to his face, that rare, full smile that had become more frequent over the months they had shared. "I still think about those 7 days sometimes," he admitted. "How close we came to never having this. If I'd taken a different trail, if your fever had been worse." "But you didn't." "And it wasn't," she reminded him. "Perhaps it was fate, as we said back then." "Fate," he echoed, considering the concept. "Or just the luckiest wrong turn I ever took." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Remington and Penelope Nash stood together on their porch, coffee cooling forgotten as they watched the spectacle unfold, their hands intertwined, gold bands catching the fading light symbols of a promise made not from necessity or convention, but from choice and love. In the distance, a hawk soared on thermal currents, free and wild against the vast sky. Penelope thought of the wooden carving she had discovered months ago, of the skill and care evident in every detail. It sat now on their mantelpiece, a reminder of the artistry that lived within the man beside her, the depths that continued to reveal themselves day by day. "I love you, Remington Nash," she said simply, because some truths needed no elaboration. His arms tightened around her, his voice low and certain in her ear. "And I love you, Penelope Nash, today, tomorrow, and all the days after." As darkness fell and stars emerged in the desert sky, they remained on the porch, watching as the world transformed once again. The harshness of day gave way to the gentle beauty of night, much as fever had given way to healing, solitude to companionship, chance to choice. 7 days had been just the beginning, a lifetime stretched before them now, full of possibilities neither had dared to imagine before finding each other in the vast, unforgiving, beautiful wilderness they now called home. The following spring brought new life to the Nash ranch. Calves frolicked in the pastures, the garden yielded its first harvest, and Penelope's belly swelled with the child they had created together. Life had settled into a rhythm that suited them both, days filled with hard work and shared purpose, evenings spent in quiet companionship, or with occasional visits from their growing circle of friends. Remington had expanded the cabin further in preparation for the baby's arrival, adding a nursery adjacent to their bedroom. He had crafted the furniture himself during the winter months, a cradle, a small chest for clothes, a rocking chair for Penelope. Each piece bore the marks of his careful attention, his love evident in every detail. As Penelope's time grew near, Dr. Matthews visited more frequently, reassuring them both that everything progressed normally. Still, Remington worried, the memory of Penelope's fever and near death never far from his thoughts. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Penelope reminded him gently when she caught him frowning at her swollen ankles. "I'm healthy and strong now, thanks largely to you." "Can't help worrying," he admitted. "You're everything to me." She took his hand, placing it on her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Soon there will be more of everything to love." When labor began on a warm May morning, Remington sent for the doctor and Mrs. Turner, who had agreed to assist with the birth. The hours that followed tested both their courage, Penelope's, as she endured the pain of childbirth, Remington's, as he was forced to wait helplessly, hearing her cries but unable to ease her suffering. As sunset approached, a new cry filled the air, the strong, indignant wail of their son entering the world. When Remington was finally allowed into the room, the sight that greeted him brought tears to his eyes. Penelope, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she invited, her voice tired but filled with joy. Remington approached cautiously, awed by the tiny being his wife presented to him. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened them briefly, eyes that promised to be as blue as his mother's. "He's perfect," Remington whispered, gently touching the infant's cheek. "Just like his mother." "We need a name," Penelope reminded him. They had discussed possibilities but had made no final decision, wanting to see their child first. Remington studied the small face, so new yet somehow familiar. "What about Joseph?" he suggested. "After your uncle. If not for him, you would never have come west. We would never have found each other." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Joseph Nash," she tested the name. "It's perfect." As night fell, Mrs. Turner and Dr. Matthews departed, leaving the new family to their privacy. Remington sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Penelope, the other supporting their son as he nursed. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. Penelope looked up, love shining in her eyes despite her exhaustion. "For what?" "For coming west, for surviving, for choosing to stay. For this." He indicated the child in her arms, the home around them, the life they had built together. "I should be thanking you," she countered. "You saved my life." Remington shook his head. "No, you saved mine. I just didn't know it needed saving until you." In the quiet room, with their son sleeping peacefully between them, the truth of those words settled around them like a blessing. From the fever that had nearly claimed Penelope's life had grown a love that had transformed them both, giving new purpose to Remington's solitary existence and new strength to Penelope's search for independence. The journey had not always been easy, and the path ahead would hold its own challenges. But as they sat together in the home they had created, with the desert night vast and star-filled beyond their windows, Both knew with certainty that they would face whatever came, as they had faced everything since those first 7 days together, each making the other stronger, each finding in the other the reflection of their best self. Outside, the desert continued its ancient rhythms, harsh yet nurturing, unforgiving, yet filled with unexpected beauty, much like life itself. And within the walls they had built, both literally and figuratively, the Nash family began its own journey, founded on a chance encounter that had become, against all odds, the greatest blessing either could have imagined. From fever to forever, from dying to living, from solitude to family, the transformation was complete, yet ever evolving. A story that had begun with 7 critical days but would continue for all the days of their lives.